Hi, welcome to the first part of the Curvy Capsule lecture series, the more formal course. So a little bit about me, if you are new to this space, my name is Jackie Schwitter. I have a bachelor's degree in U.S. history and I have a master's degree in Holocaust and Genocide studies. So my areas of expertise lie in gender, war, society, and then imperialism as a form of genocide. So I focus a lot on gender and sexuality within these confines, but I wanted to begin our course with some basics first. So I think it's important to kind of understand how we get to our present day situation through examining the past and the lens with which we as Americans continue to operate. So what I want to begin with is just a couple quick definitions. Really, I want to talk about the definition of genocide. I think a lot of people falsely assume it largely means violence against a particular group, but it can mean lots of different things. And I think that is really important for us to focus on as well. So genocide is the involuntary or voluntary destruction of a group of people by harming them in economic, cultural, physical, religious, or mental capacities. All of that is super important for this discussion today. Like I said, I think people get stuck on the violence part, but we neglect to realize that cultural genocide and economic genocide are equally violent to communities that are being affected. And this definition matters. It matters for several reasons. One, because it helps the victims of those atrocities to begin the healing process. And two, it also allows governing bodies to then formally sanction those responsible. The language matters because the crime, so you've got crimes against humanity and then you have genocide, and they are prosecuted in two very different ways because the systems are flawed. So, and this definition really came about following the Holocaust. So, it's going to be part of a little bit of your homework assignment later. Trust me, they're going to be really small and easy. It's really just to help you understand the nuances of these topics that we're talking about. So, British imperialism. Britain, as we know, is quite a small country. And for a large part of the 17th, 18th, 19th century, they controlled 2/3 of the known world. And another part of your homework assignment, if you're taking notes right now, it's going to be to look up what the Commonwealth of Nations, what it is, what it means, and how many countries are involved. So Britain still controls quite a few countries. In fact, I think it's every 4 years or so, or every 2 years. I don't quite remember, but they hold the Commonwealth Games, which is very similar to like an Olympics, but it is just for countries within the Commonwealth of Nations. So it's astounding when you do the research to look at how many countries still have ties to Britain, and how many countries have adjusted and reworked their systems and their governing bodies based off of British policies. So, age of exploration, we are talking about 15th, 16th, 17th centuries predominantly. However, it did continue well into the 18th and 19th century. So, the age of exploration was when European nations were basically trying to beat one another to explore new worlds and territories. It was the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English mainly. It is highly romanticized in our textbooks. We look at folks like Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, these famous explorers who went on these great expeditions, even somebody like John Smith, who is also highly romanticized with the story of Pocahontas, and how it has been whitewashed and made more palatable than what the actual truth is. So the age of exploration really was white folks conquering and discovering territories where indigenous populations were already living and thriving. So the New World, the New World is considered North America. And initially, the Dutch settled in parts of Canada, New York, what is now New York State, up the coast of Maine. And so they established fur trading posts because furs were a highly prized commodity in Europe. So the Dutch, in the beginning had no interest really in expanding further inward. They were quite successful. They kind of had a bit of a monopoly going on. The English come in around the early 1600s and want to do the same thing. The Dutch had already established themselves and had an alliance with the local indigenous tribes. They basically gave the indigenous population goods that they wanted and that they could use. So when the English came in, they wanted to do the same thing, and they wanted to trade with the local indigenous tribes as well, but what they were offering was not what was useful to the natives. And so they really were just like, we don't really care what you have to offer because all of our needs are being met. Okay, so we're going to talk about some charters and what they mean. So King James I, King of England, issued several charters to the Virginia and the North Virginia companies. So these were groups of men who were interested not only in establishing fur trading posts, but in establishing colonies in the New World, because they thought that it was quite valuable and that the land that they would be discovering was useful enough for their purposes. So he issued these charters. 1620 is really like a landmark year, and why that's important is because land grants were extended. Like I said, we're moving from fur trading into colonization. As we all know, the Plymouth colony, it's quite famous. It's what we have the myth of Thanksgiving surrounding is, the settlers working side by side with the indigenous population. Yes, the local Native American tribes did help the settlers, but it was really at the time for their own benefit, because they were profiting off of these white folks coming in and trading. So it seemed like a pretty good setup. I mean, obviously, until it wasn't. So the Plymouth colonists in their initial years really struggled. Quite a few of them died, for lack of being prepared for the elements, unable to work the land, not being prepared enough for the struggles that come with colonizing a new world. So it wasn't until the early 1630s when the Plymouth colony, with the help of the indigenous tribes, found their footing. They no longer were struggling to survive. In fact, they were thriving. This is where the major conflict comes in. And this is where my thesis and my own research has led me to the point where I firmly believe that British imperialism, which is what we're talking about, is a form of genocide. So not only have they come into this new world and taken over and established colonies, which initially, like I said, didn't particularly bother the native communities, but as we soon will see, it becomes quite clear their violent intentions. But they're coming in, they're bringing their diseases. They are bringing weaponry that the native communities are unfamiliar with and truthfully cannot defend themselves successfully against. And then we'll see that they slowly push these native communities out, and they also force them in a lot of ways to clash with one another, because one tribe is kind of establishing a foothold among the others. It all becomes a bit complicated. So I'm hoping that this discussion will maybe kind of break it down into a bit of a smaller, more understandable place for you. So one of the main events that occur is the Mystic or Pequot Massacre. this is something that I didn't learn about in my textbooks. This is something that I only discovered within grad school. So you're talking about, gosh, 17 plus years of learning and study, and never once was this something that I came across until doing research in grad school. So, which is a shame. So we're going to talk about the Pequot Massacre. I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to restart a new one just because I think that this is all the bandwidth I have on my phone. So this is the end of the small introduction. Stay tuned for the next video, which is going to talk about the Pequot Massacre. And this is all part of class number 1.